What we consider to be a modern comic makes no sense, but let me explain. Comic books have been popular for nearly a century at this point, but how we categorize them makes no sense. For instance, what we call the Golden Age of comics lasted from 1938 with the introduction of Superman and ended around 1956. This is where we get characters like Superman, Batman, The Flash, even Captain America, all within this 18-year window. This was followed by the Silver Age of comics, lasting from 1956 to 1970. That's where we get Barry Allen's version of The Flash, the Fantastic Four, the X-Men, Spider-Man, and basically every Marvel character. All of these coming out within a 14-year window. Following the ending of the Silver Age, we go into Bronze, which lasts from 1970 to 1985. This is the beginning of when comics started to take a darker turn, getting a lot more serious, introducing more dark characters, like the Punisher here, and introduced a lot more darker themes, like alcoholism and drug use with superheroes. The Bronze Age lasted for 15 years. This is where I start to have a bit of a problem, because now we're in the modern age of comics, going from 1985 to today. You might be wondering why I'm having such a problem with the modern age of comics. Well, because it covers almost the same amount of time as the previous 3 ages combined. I mean, think about it this way. The original Secret Wars from 1987 would fall under the same umbrella as Jonathan Hickman's Secret Wars. It should also include characters like Spawn, which came out 32 years ago. To put this in perspective, that's like saying a comic book from 1985 is in the same category as a comic from 1945. Another way to put it into perspective is to realize that the start of the modern age of comics to today is the same difference in time from 1 year before the beginning of the Second World War to the year that Star Wars came out. I don't know about you, but that seems like a big time difference. In conclusion, categorizing time frames in comic book terms makes no sense, and calling a comic book modern is very confusing. This is the Invisible Woman from Fantastic Four, and her life was saved by misogyny. Let's get into it. This all takes place in the original Fantastic Four Volume 1, issues 280 and 281, where our normally gentle-souled Sue Storm gets corrupted into a new character, Malice, a manifestation of all of Sue Storm's dark thoughts and hatred. The matriarch of Marvel's first family is throwing hands, and they're rated E for everyone. And after Malice already took out Ben Grimm, the Thing, and her own brother, Johnny Storm, Reed Richards was left with only one option. If she's powered by hate, maybe overloading her will make her go back to normal. So you might be thinking to yourself, how is Reed Richards going to make her hate him? Well, honestly, the answer is quite simple. A ridiculous amount of shit talking. Malice is going about a typical villain monologue when Reed cuts in, saying, "Susan, be quiet. Daredevil and I are in no mood to listen to your drivel any longer. Your cowardly attack has temporarily incapacitated Johnny, and we must tend to him. So shut up now." Malice is justifiably taken aback by this, since that's her husband. But Reed's not done and doubles down, saying, "Susan, I told you to be quiet. We indulged your foolish female outbursts, but now is not the time for such games." Malice is almost there. She's about to snap. And she warns Reed, telling him that she's about to attack him. And he goes, "Oh, will you?" And at that moment, Reed took action and bitch slapped his wife.
Hey, yo, what the fuck?
Malice immediately flies off the handle and starts punching him in the chest, screaming at him. And I'm not even kidding you. It actually worked. It snapped her out of the trance and freed Susan from Malice's control. And that, friends, is the story about how one man belittling and attacking his wife saved her from going down an irredeemably dark path. Also, I know I haven't addressed it in all this video, but the costume for Malice. I don't... They took her from basically being a mother figure from Marvel's first family. I mean actual first family. This is the first comic book that Marvel really had that took off in the 60s in the Silver Age boom. And in the words from Broly from Dragon Ball Z, she became a true freak.
Ugh. Brother, ugh.
If you enjoyed the video, leave a like and subscribe, and let me know what other comics you want to see me cover.
The Fantastic Four changed comics forever, and it's not in the way you think. In the early 1960s, Stan Lee was getting disillusioned with comic books. He was actually on his way out the door, since a majority of the 50s comic books were centered around romance, westerns, and horror. And superhero comic books like Captain America, who Stan Lee used to write for but didn't actually create, were on the back burner. But before he walked out the doors of Marvel for good, he was stopped by his wife, who told him, "If you're gonna quit anyway, why don't you submit a book that you really want to make? And if it gets rejected, oh well, you were wanting to quit." And the book he ended up writing was Fantastic Four, issue number 1. And to Stan's surprise, the Fantastic Four took off immediately. And at that point, the publishers ordered even more superhero comics, and Stan began creating, giving us characters like the Incredible Hulk, Spider-Man, and more. Think about it this way. Basically every single Marvel character that you recognize came as a result from Stan creating the Fantastic Four, and it becoming such a huge sensation. And all of this came about because Stan was about to quit. So maybe if you're thinking about giving up on something, just try one more time, because you never know what might happen.
Absolute Batman is kinda nuts. I mean, not only is his emblem a giant axe, he has retractable forearm blades. Oh yeah, and those cartoonishly massive ears. His version of batarangs. Not kidding. Which he's able to use to quickly take down an army of people. But according to Alfred, he, misses every major artery, so they're not actually gone, just heavily maimed. And at least it doesn't damage people too badly. Oh, wait a minute. Okay, yeah, that settles it. Absolute Batman doesn't give a f. The creator of Superman had to do some pretty sleazy things to get by. And trust me, it's enough to make you go,
Hey, yo, what the fuck?
Superman originally debuted in 1938 in Action Comics issue number 1, and it was created by these two men, writer Jerry Siegel and artist Joe Shuster. And he's the one we're focusing on today. Because you see, friends, even though he designed the father of all superheroes, and arguably one of the most popular ones of all time, it unfortunately didn't leave him with a lot of money at the end of the day. So after working on Superman between the 30s and 40s, Joe Shuster had to find other work during the 50s. But unfortunately for our friend Joe, things took a bit of a turn. This is because during the 50s, superheroes were on a bit of a decline. And you wouldn't think about it now, but during the 50s there was a boom in horror and romance comic books. So one of the creators of Superman took that idea and ran with it to an extreme by working on books known as Knights of Horror, which is a fetish comic book. Yes, friends, you heard me right, and this is some of Joe Shuster's artwork during that time. It's crazy to think that the artist behind the creation of one of the biggest characters in all of fiction had to resort to this to pay the bills. And the craziest part is, that is the most YouTube-appropriate artwork that I could find out of the entire series. It's just weird that the father of the world's greatest hero was a freak. Have you ever gone looking at old comic books and seen this logo? I'm sure you have, but why was it there in the first place? Well, let me explain. This is the symbol for the Comics Code Authority. But what is that and what do they do? Short answer, government censorship. Long answer, let's get into it. It might be a little bit weird to think about it now, but back in the 1950s, superheroes weren't the biggest deal. In fact, some of the biggest selling comic books at the time were actually westerns, romance stories, and horror stories. And honestly, going all the way back to the 40s, the government was trying to get involved in censoring comic books. But everything kind of ramped up with the introduction of this man, Frederick Wertham, author of the book Seduction of the Innocent, in which Dr. Wertham fabricated studies where he said that reading comic books turned kids into juvenile delinquents and, at some points, gay. Yeah, I'm not even kidding either. He actually thought that comic books would corrupt the youth. Funny enough, the characters he cited the most in his false studies saying that they would turn kids homosexual was Batman. Specifically because they don't understand how Batman could be living with a young boy like that. And that's why we have Batgirl, specifically to throw off those rumors. But because comic books had gotten so dark in the 50s, so the publishers began self-censoring to avoid government interference by creating an organization known as the Comics Magazine Association of America, where they had to abide by certain rules, like criminals can't be sympathetic. They couldn't use the words horror or terror in the titles. The good guy always has to win, and women had to be drawn with realistic proportions. And these rules were called the Comics Code. Eventually, things started to get more edgy again into the 80s. And at that point, they basically stopped using the Comics Code and decided they would publish exactly what they wanted to. But this was basically all built off of a lie and the idea that they didn't want to have grotesque, gruesome, and vile comic books in the 50s. And if you're interested, I mean, there are covers out there that can't even be shown on YouTube due to terms of service. Because even 70 years ago, the covers were that graphic. And because of this and the fact that they didn't want the government to be directly involved, they began to self-police. I mean, if you really think about it, the amount of freedom that current comic books have compared to what they had even 40 years ago when the code was still active is insane. The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles just had a crossover with Naruto, and you'd think it'd be a match made in heaven. And you would be Completely wrong. And I knew this was going to be off to a rocky start from page 1. Because you'd think that it would be something like, I don't know, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles get sucked into the world of Naruto, or vice versa. But then we find out that April O'Neil is visiting Konoha from the village of the Big Apple.
Hey, yo, what the fuck?
Yep. Right there. Instead of New York City, she's from Big Apple Village. She explains to Squad 7 the reason she was visiting in the first place was to talk with Lady Tsunade, the foremost expert in biology, because she's working on a story about Baxter Stockman and the creations that he made. She explains that Baxter Stockman created the ooze, which created animal mutants. And there was a panel on this page that caught my eye, specifically because the World Trade Center still exists. And I'm not gonna lie, I was caught off guard until I realized there was no airplanes in Naruto. But then, the Foot Clan shows up. How are Team 7 going to fight them? Well, simple answer, they don't. Because out of puffs of smoke, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles arrived. And they completely neutralized the threat. So who are they gonna fight? Well, of course, they all decide to fight each other, because introducing themselves is too difficult. Then they fight, and I'm not kidding, for 13 out of the 22 pages. And they're all set up in mirror matches. I mean, you have the stoic one, the rage-filled hothead, and the one with the touch of the tism, and Mikey. And somehow, both teams are on equal footing. Yeah, a group of Genin just kept up with a team of apparently Ambu Black Ops members. But Naruto at least gets to use his signature technique, Art of the Doppelgangers. Being a comic and anime fan, this is just bad.
Yeah, so turns out I don't know how to actually count, so these numbers are going to be a little off.
Messed up moments in comics that made us go.
Hey, yo, what the fuck?
Part 171. This is DC Horror Presents number 1, and our story begins on the Isle of Themyscira, where one of the Amazonians has been brutally attacked. And we find out this is actually the 3rd night in a row where something like this has happened. Wonder Woman and Wonder Girl find a trail of blood leading back to the crypt of Diana's mother. As Diana begins to open the tomb, she feels something moving inside, and that would be her zombified mother, who makes quick work of an Amazonian warrior by bisecting her. Diana is completely taken aback. She doesn't know how to process this information, as Queen Hippolyta's zombified corpse rips through the Amazons. Thankfully, Wonder Girl has her pinned down, but unfortunately, in Diana's mind, all she can see is a vision of her mother begging for help before she was taken out. So Wonder Woman does the obvious thing and attacks her friend, before her former mother starts spewing maggots and snakes on her. The corpse begins to push Diana closer towards the pits of Tartarus. But Diana's not going to accept this fate lightly, and she tells her mother this. But Hippolyta puts up a good fight, as more snakes escape her mummified body and begin to attack Diana, biting into her body and ensnaring her, dragging her to her doom. Thankfully, Wonder Girl survives, and together, the two of them are able to push her back, sealing her away forever. That's when we find out this was all planned by the evil sorceress, Circe, as a gift to Wonder Woman on Mother's Day.
Messed up moments in comics that made us go.
Hey, yo, what the fuck?
Part 172. One night, a girl named Matilda goes to her room to find her boyfriend, but he's not there. She rushes down to see the EMTs. She needs to see his body. She says she can fix him, but they won't let her near. But just as the ambulance is about to drive away, a sledgehammer crashes through the windshield, taking out one of the drivers. It was Matilda, and she tells the other EMT, drive. She makes him take her to a location known as the Toy Box, and as soon as they arrive, she smashes his face in and takes it to wear as her own. Because it turns out, friends, this woman is the DC villain known as Dollhouse, daughter of the doll maker, and the Toy Box is his house. She knows that her father can help save her boyfriend, so together the both of them get to work, removing limbs, hearts, veins, to implant all of this into her boyfriend Max, trying to save his life before it's too late. They move him out to a different room so he doesn't awake to a huge shock. With a zap of electricity, he comes back to life, but he's not thankful. He's terrified. He says he was finally free. But free from what? Just then, Dollhouse takes a mallet and crushes Max's head, taking him out herself, saying, "You think you could break up with me? Over your dead body." The Ultimate Universe over at Marvel might be their biggest, hottest property. However, it's not the first Ultimate Universe. Let me explain. Marvel consistently had one continuity of comics going all the way back to the first appearance of Captain America to the 2000s. And they wanted to make things a little bit easier for new readers to hop on and not have to go through 60 years of back comics. So they came up with a brilliant idea. Let's create a separate universe that we'll call the Ultimate Universe, where people can start off with issue number 1 of their favorite heroes, starting with Spider-Man. And honestly, it was an amazing idea, and it starts great. But then, things got a little weird. Marvel basically used this new universe to do anything they wanted to do to their characters, like taking them out in horrifically gruesome ways, like with the Wasp. Or, for example, something crazy, I don't know, like maybe Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver being in an intimate relationship even though they're twins. And I mean, like Alabama levels of intimate. And they decide to get down and dirty while Wolverine is watching, who they allude to being their father.
Hey, yo, what the fuck?
On top of this, when Captain America is obviously confused by the entire situation, the Wasp tries to play it off like it's his regressive thinking that's stopping him from being able to accept this. And she tells him that they love each other, and he says, well, yeah, of course they do. They're brother and sister. And she says, no, they're in love. Yeah, I don't care if he's from 1944, Cap is in the right here. So really, at the end of the day, I hope that this new Ultimate Universe doesn't go down the same dark path as the old one. But hey, at least that one gave us Miles.
Steve Rogers wasn't Captain America.
Hey, yo, what the fuck?
But let me explain. Obviously nowadays a lot of people associate Sam Wilson, Falcon, as Captain America. But I'm not talking about him. I'm also not referring to Isaiah Bradley, Captain America, either. I'm talking about the Captain America printed in Golden Age comic books. Yes, friends, it's true. This Captain America who's fighting Red Skull isn't Steve Rogers. As we all know, Captain America was frozen in a chunk of ice during World War II. Modern tellings, he's been frozen for over 80 years, but back then it was only about 20, before showing back up in Avengers issue number 4. But the funny thing is, they kept printing Captain America comics well into the mid-50s, 10 years after the end of World War II. And once they started publishing him in comics again, they had to come up with a reason on how Captain America was still publishing stories when he was supposed to be frozen. And they came up with the idea that multiple people were playing both Cap and Bucky, with this being the first published appearance of the second Captain America, William Nussland, who eventually would go on to become a character known as the Spirit of 76. Basically, imagine if Captain America and Paul Revere did the Metamor Fusion dance. He served as Captain America for a few years after the disappearance of Steve Rogers, before being replaced with the third Captain America, William Burnside. But he didn't stay Captain America for long, because eventually he would become... oh.
Brother, ugh.
Obviously this persona came out later, but Burnside acted as the last Captain America, with this being the final panel he ever showed up in the suit. And at that point, Cap didn't show up in any further comics at all, before Steve came back in 1964. And that, friends, is how they retconned 10 years of Captain America stories away. Most of the Hulk's original comic book run doesn't exist.
Hey, yo, what the fuck?
But allow me to explain. Obviously, the Incredible Hulk has been a massive staple in the comic book collecting scene, and has become a household name thanks to his many appearances on film and TV. So, what exactly do I mean when I say that most of his comic book run doesn't exist? Well, let's get into it. This is Incredible Hulk issue number 1, debuting in 1962. Where as you can see, the Hulk is a little bit different. Originally, he was more of a ripoff of Jekyll and Hyde. He would actually just change at night, and when the sunlight hit him, he would revert back to his normal form. He was created with the gamma radiation, that is true. However, he wasn't activated by rage. With the second issue, things began to radically change. Beginning with issue number 2, we see the Hulk take on his green iconic form. Continuing into issue number 3, number 4, 5, and 6. And of course, after the success of the Incredible Hulk's first 6 issues, they had to continue him, with issue 102. Wait a minute. That math ain't mathin'. It turns out the first 6 issues of The Incredible Hulk actually sold so poorly, it was cancelled. And he was basically only relevant in cameo appearances, much like the MCU. So of course you'd see him pop up in books like The Avengers and others. And one of the main ones he would pop up in was a book series called Tales to Astonish, which was also the first appearance of Groot, as well as Hank Pym's Ant-Man. And after the Hulk being such a huge character in Tales to Astonish, they decided to change the name and just give him his own series back. So if you ever wanted to read all of the Incredible Hulk comic books in order, you'd start at 1 through 6 and go straight to 102. At least if you're only counting his mainline title.
Like and subscribe.